How's it going?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Thanks for taking the time on a Sunday morning.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for coming on, man.
Yeah,
How are you dealing with the bear market? Like this week was eventful, no?
yeah, sure was. It was pretty, yeah, pretty
Have you?
stressful to be honest. I mean, not in terms of the project I'm working on, but just in terms of having a bit of Luna and having a bit of UST myself, and just
Mm,
like trying to, plot a path to work out what to do with it. Yeah, I mean, I got out of most of it, but
mm,
some of it was locked and thought chain, blah blah blah. Pretty, yeah. So a bit stressful, and just I don't know. I just feel like I think we kind of felt the real bear market beginning to hit,
mm.
and so yeah, a little bit stressful in that regard. But is what it is. I've sort of it's always been on the cards.
Yeah.
So how about
I mean,
you?
pretty much the same. I think I had some amount invested in Luna. I mean, not too much, but you live and learn. I think it's what was shocking was how quickly it all went down.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think that was what was shocking for me because you get used to projects going down, but it's usually more gradual.
yeah,
But once it started going down, it was, I mean, it's like people have talked about before. I think Al Gore and some other people talked about it. And it's the cycle. And once it just started crashing, it's just, I mean, I think it's a lesson more than
yeah.
anything else.
I agree.
Um, anyway, speaking of, I mean, like, so you're here obviously to talk about Autonolas, and this project is something like, again, so I have a DeFi background, right?
Hmm.
And my experience in terms of DAO tooling is non-existent essentially. So I would let you define, go on and talk about Autonolas, give a brief about what you guys are trying to build, and then we can take it from there.
Sure. Okay, so we'll just go straight into it. Basically, the mission of Autonolas is to put an autonomous service into the heart of every DAO, and we'll talk about what an autonomous service is in a second. But maybe if we just focus for a second on what the autonomous means in DAO, because really, like at the heart of what we're trying to do is to make DAOs more autonomous. So there are basically two strands of autonomy that we see. One is on the human side, so giving people in general, but in specifically in DAOs, the freedom to work and to impact an organization as they please, and that's typically being done by creating these protocols which coordinate human activity and kind of manage them without a central human kind of coordinator.
Mhm.
And then there's the machine autonomy, which is essentially having machines run without any or with very low amounts of human input. And so those are the two kind of strands which we're working on.
Mhm.
Concretely, what does Autonolas do? Well, we want to enable developers to actually build these autonomous services themselves. So we have an open source stack and an on-chain protocol, which allows developers to kind of secure and run these autonomous services.
Mhm.
Broadly, where do we sit in terms of like, what category of thing is autonomous? It's what I would call Web3 native compute.
Mhm.
So we can talk a little bit about like what other projects are working on this in the space. It's an emerging category, I would say.
Mhm.
We've seen things like Akash in the past, or maybe Golem further back, where these kind of projects will basically let you run your code in a decentralized way. But
Mhm.
I would say that was sort of a decentralized version of AWS, but what we're doing is, I would say, more sort of crypto native than that, and that should become obvious as I kind of talk through what we do. and so yeah, basically we enable developers to build these autonomous services, and so it's worth giving kind of a definition first of what an autonomous service is, and as we go on, it'll become clearer like where they fit and how they expand the crypto space. We think quite significantly. So autonomous service, I would define essentially as basically it's a new type of crypto app which combines the economic power of Web3 with flexible sort of intelligent computation of Web2. So I think we're all quite familiar with smart contracts. Smart contracts are, decentralized. They're in the sense that they're run by a kind of a set of independent operators, which makes them very robust in that, at any given moment, a blockchain is not likely to go down because, even if a few of those operators fall off, the mechanisms by which they come to consensus are extremely robust, and that means that you can kind of sustain large quantities of capital on blockchains. The smart contracts are also very transparent. In the sense that you can read all of the code which is running. You can see that code running on an ongoing basis. And smart contracts also have this great element of composability in the sense that, as a developer, for example, if you're coming in and you want to build a new lending protocol, you don't necessarily have to do all of the work to build that lending protocol yourself. You can leverage, smart contracts which already exist, spin them up and deploy them yourselves. So that's smart contracts. That's incredible economic power in that, but there are limitations of smart contracts in that they can't do kind of computation which is running all the time like a normal application can. They can't do like very, very complex computation. An extreme example of that is that it's very, very unlikely that we'll ever see meaningful sort of machine learning or like the most advanced machine learning running on blockchains. But even like, relatively sophisticated computation just won't happen on Web2, on smart contracts. And then the smart contracts are also limited in that they can't sort of reach out and pull data off any external service, so like a database somewhere or an API, like a Web2 API. And so these elements of sort of kind of running continuously, doing complex computation, extreme example, machine learning, and calling any API are things which Web2 services are very good at. And so we say that the way to think about an autonomous service is that autonomous service combines those strengths of smart contracts with the strengths of Web2 services, and that means that you get these extremely powerful systems which are capable of doing like very intelligent computation, taking action on blockchains in a way that just smart contracts just are never going to be able to do themselves. So I can, tell you a little bit about like how that actually works. Maybe that's a natural next place to go. Yeah. Okay. So basically, as a developer builds an autonomous service using our open source off-chain stacks, and they then register it on our on-chain protocol. And what happens at that point is that a set of operators come in, independent operators, in the same way you can think about it in the same way that node operators run a blockchain, and they, as a group, run one of these services, and in this sort of continuous, very robust way. And that robustness comes from basically these agents coming to consensus about every action that they take together. Then the service is able to sort of do very rich data processing, so it can pull in data from anywhere in order to run complex operations, and then they're able to sort of take secure and but very flexible interaction on any blockchain that we're deployed on.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's as comprehensive an explanation I could have had. And thank you so much for that. So this leads to a couple of questions from my side. So for DAOs, clearly there's a need, like you say, you're bringing back autonomous in the fair definition of being a DAO.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some of the challenges right now that DAOs face and that you guys are trying to address?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, we're talking about making DAOs more autonomous. What is the, and kind of implicit in that is that we're saying that because they're not very autonomous currently, that there are problems with that. And so, yeah, so what are those problems? There are, I would say, many, and I think, people who are working or even have just interacted with DAOs kind of have quite a visceral experience of this, in that, one, DAOs are extremely slow moving currently. I think they're also beginning to see, and I think they'll increasingly see, sort of churn from contributors, particularly as we go into a bear market. There are liability concerns in DAOs, and we also see big blockers in terms of like the scalability, the quality of user experiences that they're able to deliver, and also just their ability to kind of interact with other DAOs. So I'll talk about each of those separately. The first one was slow moving, like how slow moving DAOs are. And some famous examples of this are the sort of like some of the big lending protocols which need an entire DAO vote, i.e., a consensus from every token holder, or like even a large kind of proportion of token holders, to make decisions on a regular basis about which assets to list, to delist, and setting interest rates, that kind of thing. I mean, that's the analogy which people have raised is that it's almost like having your entire set of shareholders make be involved in the kind of ongoing decision making as a business, which is pretty absurd when you kind of frame it like that. So that's one of the problems, and that obviously slows everything down. Another one is just sort of the contributor experience, which we're increasingly I believe will lead to a lot of churn, particularly in the bear market. And that, at the heart of that is just there's this ethos of flat hierarchies, but there's very little way of actually kind of actually coordinating people and effort, whilst maintaining that level of kind of flat hierarchy. And we can get into like the sort of the actual kind of technical reasons why we see this happening, but it's kind of undeniable that this is the case. Another thing which we're seeing is that DAOs are increasingly kind of making themselves liable to regulatory risk, in the fact that we see a few reasons here, but particularly in trying to automate some particularly actions around the on-chain protocols by DAOs are spinning up kind of bots which run on AWS or whatever, and we see those as legitimate targets for regulators. So that's something that DAOs are facing. Yeah, go ahead.
So so naturally, the question is, so how does Autonolas help address all of these challenges?
Yes. Okay. So basically, okay. So maybe before touching on that, what I would talk about is sort of how people have tried to fix these things so far. Yeah. So broadly, I think there are two buckets which could be considered kind of fixes for this. There's DAO tooling as a bucket, and then there's middleware. And so DAO tooling, the kind of meme which sticks in mind when I think about the DAO tooling category is like Trello for Web3, or like some task management. And so our feeling is that DAO tooling thus far has been very focused on sort of having humans work better together. But I think one of the core problems there is really it doesn't get to the heart of the issue, which is that it's extremely difficult to coordinate humans using a smart contract because smart contracts can't kind of reach out and talk dynamically to different services. They can't talk to they can't see what's going on in kind of the marketing channels, or the code repositories, or where work actually gets done, in order to kind of create richer, more complex sort of coordination protocols. So DAO tool builders are very, very limited in that regard currently. And then then there's this kind of second category which people might sort of develop. You could think of developers as using to kind of fix these kind of problems, which is sort of middleware, oracles, bridges, sort of keepers, which are the kind of necessary primitives for solving these kind of problems. But where developers are blocked there basically is that you can pull in a price feed here, you can use a cross-chain bridge there, but those are there's no way to kind of put those things together. There's no kind of composability, and so that makes it extremely difficult for developers to build these kind of rich solutions which are required to take DAOs to the next level.
So, I mean, is this due to a lack of infrastructure, lack of resources, or it's just how smart contracts work?
So, yeah, I mean, so what we think it is that there isn't a substrate yet, a platform or a set of tools to build this kind of thing. It just doesn't exist. Very few have really gone after this problem, and yeah, I think there's an assumption on the part of builders that you either got to do everything on chain, in which case it's crypto native, or you do everything off chain, in which case you have to go the centralized route. And oh dear, we've gone the centralized route, but there was no other option. And so yeah, really, I think at the heart of the problem is that there just isn't a set of tools or a substrate for developers to use, and that's really what Autonolas is aimed at.
And I would imagine, like, when it comes to building these services, I mean, there is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's no right way to do it. I mean, it's all trade-offs, right? So it's eventually up to the developer how they're trying to approach it. Is that correct?
I would say that that's the current state of the of how it works as a developer. Yeah, you basically need to say, okay, we're either going to if okay, so it's maybe just to touch on a few kind of concrete problems which we see this solving, like what are the actual problems which this can solve for DAOs, and then we can talk about how developers might currently go about solving this. So for example, let's look at two kind of broad categories. One is sort of treasury management for DAOs, and another is governance. So if you want to say you're a DAO and you want to get some yield on your assets, which ironically it seems like very few DAOs are actually doing it. We put out a piece of research recently which shows that only 5% of the assets in the treasuries of the top sort of top DAOs, basically biggest DAOs, only 5% is being deployed, and admittedly that's skewed by the fact that a chunk of that is native tokens to that DAO, but even still, like when you strip that out, the number is still very, very small. And so there are reasons for that. Like I think there are risk. I think a lot of DAOs still feel like there's sufficient risk in certain sets of smart contracts, etc. I mean that's one explanation for it. But if you look at what it actually takes for a DAO to get yield on its assets, it's extremely complicated. Like how does a DAO actually do it? Maybe they elect a sub DAO And then the sub-DAO, and implicitly in doing that, by giving responsibility to an individual or a small group of individuals, even if there's a multi-sig, you're still kind of sort of centralizing control and taking a risk in that by doing so. But even that group of people, it's a lot for that group of people to manage, to stay on top of, changing trends in, yield, also just like sort of operationally, like how do they actually do it? They have to, sign a massive amount of transactions. If they're a multi-sig, it's heavy work to sort of, be coming to consensus about what opportunity to move to, creating the transaction. You're going to have, a majority of people come in, sign the transaction, and multiply that out on an ongoing basis. It's very taxing. And so where an autonomous service comes in here, for example, is that a DAO could essentially vote in a autonomous service, which maybe is controlled by is managed by a sub DAO, but the autonomous service itself tracks yield across different protocols, which it's able to do because of its ability to do complex processing and work across chains, and it can autonomously make decisions about how to split assets up and move them accordingly. So that's one concrete place where we see an opportunity. How would you do that? Well, I mean, that is one place where we see a lot of opportunity. The second one that I wanted to talk about was basically governance. So I touched on this earlier, where you're seeing big, take lending protocols, for example, just to reiterate that case. You'll have large sub-DAO teams within I believe a maker or an Aave. You have individuals who are specifically kind of tasked in a core team and in a community with staying on track of proposals to add new assets, to remove them, to change interest rates, and that's all based on quite well established risk frameworks, which can be encoded, but there's no way to actually encode those processes into software currently. You kind of have to keep them run by a group of humans, which is taxing for them and relatively expensive for the organization. Now, the alternative is basically that you do encode those processes, the criteria that you need for deciding whether to bring an asset on, to remove it, things like, I don't know, the amount of liquidity, volume, not exactly sure what they use, but these things can all be pulled in using an autonomous service. The autonomous service can aggregate that information, make decisions about what should happen, and if the DAO trusts it to, and it feels confident about it, then can have the entire proposal and parameter changed completely without any human input, all in an extremely robust way. Like if it, we're feeling that perhaps for some DAOs, and that might be quite far-fetched given the novelty of these solutions so far, but there's equal opportunity for a lot of the groundwork to be taken out by an autonomous service, pulling in all that data, making the aggregations, and then just submitting a proposal, which either a sub-DAO or a whole DAO can make a decision on.
And sorry to interrupt, but I think that's a very good point you made. I mean, you don't expect adoption. You don't expect the service you're providing to take over the entire service. It's a gradual process, right? And once you build credibility doing something, then they get more comfortable adopting, let's say, the whole suite of services you guys are providing. Like that's how adoption generally works.
Yeah. No, I mean, so I think a good analogy for it is, with autonomous vehicles, for example, you have sort of staged, you have stages going up to 5, which is sort of full autonomy, and maybe stage 3, I should check what the kind of exact stages are, but I believe there's one where it's like, you know, basically the driver is expected to be at the wheel, and they're notified if the car detects something going wrong or is going to make a decision, and then the driver basically has to like click a button in order to approve it or something, which is very, very similar to how I think as we kind of put our services out there and people understand them better, people will begin to adopt them sort of in a semi-autonomous way at first.
Right, right, exactly. And I think it addresses some of the challenges that DAOs face. Like you mentioned slow governance before. And I think like if you implement even a bit, like even if you implement certain aspects of the service you guys are providing, it's going to improve their efficiency. And in turn, it's going to make this process much more smoother for them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's basically how how adoption takes off, is that it's a massive competitive advantage. I mean, you know, I think for you know, to take an index or an autonomous, take an indexing protocol like an asset management, but specifically just indexes. And this is something we're working on at the moment. We have this idea around, I'm not sure if you're familiar with balance managed pools, but we see this opportunity to kind of have autonomous services control balance and managed pools. And the advantage that we see for an indexing protocol, for example, is that, you know, currently in indexing, like those individual indexes are managed by a sub DAO, or in extreme cases even like a whole DAO. And that means that, you know, every time you want to add an asset, again, this is quite similar to the lending protocol example. You know, every time you want to add an asset into the index, you want to rebalance it, you want to remove an asset, then you have to go through this whole kind of human process, which is just, you know, necessarily going to be much slower and less dynamic, and therefore less performative than something that is controlled autonomously, where, you know, all of the inputs and all of the calculations are managed by you know, one of these autonomous services. Right. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, why we think people will adopt these autonomous services is because they will provide a significant competitive edge.
Right. And I mean, it's I think the way I'm thinking about it now is, it seems like it's something that has to happen, just because it makes life easier, and any service that does that it's about time that you see adoption. And I think, like, speaking of some of the services you guys were talking about, like yield generation, treasury management is a big one. Then there's obviously the part where you talk about governance. So what are some of the products you guys are building now?
Yes, so one of the first sort of the first live running autonomous service that we have is what is a composable oracle. So what is a composable oracle? I mean, to look at it, it looks like, you know, an oracle that you've seen by any other provider. It functions in a fairly similar way, and the output is you know, comparable. But what's different about it, and this is what really makes it special, in my opinion, is that, you know, if you want to, and so to be concrete, the oracle pulls in, you know, BTC USD price pair data and writes it on chain. What's different about it is that if you need an oracle yourself, for example, okay, so say you're an index protocol, and you want to build a autonomous service which manages an index of assets, and you need to have, say, 4 or 5 price feeds which come in, form that you know, the decision-making process about whether or not to keep certain assets in, or to change the weights. Currently, there isn't really a way to do that with the existing kind of oracle providers out there. But what it looks like with Autonolas is essentially that you can fork, and ultimately, when our protocol goes live, you'll be able to just directly, at some point, maybe not in the first version, but you'll be able to just import that Oracle price feed directly. So you don't need to wait on another company in order to like spin up an Oracle for you or like a price feed for you. You can just set the data that you want to pull in, and you can aggregate it all yourself and have something up and running. So that's one of the first things that we have, composable Oracle. Something which we have coming out very soon is a kind of a fun. What we want to do is, obviously this is all it's relatively technical, and one of our challenges is really to help people understand like how it works and how these sort of applications which are powered by autonomous services will feel different and enable them to do things which they can't currently do. And so like a fun idea that we've got there is this idea of an autonomous NFT collector called
El Collector, yes.
Yeah, El Collector.
Yeah.
And
I love
so
that.
Yeah, yeah. So it was actually conceived in ETH Lisbon, the hackathon, and towards the end of last year, and now it's been built out by some of the developers in our developer community, which we can talk about later on. And yeah, essentially what it does is that it watches art blocks, the popular generative art platform for new mints, new drops, and essentially uses a relatively simple algorithm at first, but that can be extended, and buys artworks on your behalf, puts them into collection, and basically kind of assigns you some and you basically build up your collection like that. Benefits being, of course, that as an individual, all you have to do is put some ETH in, and then you're collecting. Sweet. Like all of the kind of the more waiting for different drops, making decisions about different prices. All of that is taken off your plate, and you just build up a cool collection of a cool stake in a nice collection of NFTs.
And I believe there's a third one as well, autonomous yield.
So yes, so that's been in the works, and we have some various sort of we have an external team who I can't name, but they're working on sort of yield aggregation, cross-chain yield aggregation in particular. So I mean, one of the things that we're very excited about is the idea that I mean, we've touched on it a couple of times with regards to treasury management, but basically one of the applications, big applications that we see of the stack, particularly in DeFi, is that an autonomous yield service. So the autonomous yield service basically connects into different protocols. So we have internally already built a connection into Uniswap v2 contracts, and what it can, but it's not limited to Uniswap v2 or any protocol really. It could be any EVM protocol on any chain. It could be a Solana protocol. It could be well, actually, my go-to example before was Terra, but it's not a. I mean, there are lots of great apps in the Terra ecosystem, and I'm sure they'll find a home somewhere. So wherever they find a home, you could connect in with those, and then essentially the autonomous service is capable of tracking the best yield opportunities across those protocols. So maybe at some point, whatever tulips on Solana is giving throwing out a great yield in comparison to what you could get in an LP on Uniswap, and so the autonomous service can see that, take a portion of the autonomously take a portion of the assets out from Uniswap, bridge them over to Solana, deposit them, and have them earning yield there without any human input whatsoever. We don't have that. We don't have all of that built, and in actual fact, we really want to see developers come in and build out a lot of that stuff. because that's the model. We're not a company. We're building a protocol and an ecosystem, really. But yeah, that kind of paints a picture of ultimately what we think is the user experience for yield in crypto is not like, having 10 different sites with, where you go. Maybe it's like coin index or one day, or like DeFi lending rate, DeFi rate on another day, and you're just kind of like in your head, or even with a bot trying to work out where it is, and then you kind of manually go in and get your ledger out and move it over. No, we think that basically the experience is going to be that you have one single vault where you deposit, and basically everything is taken care of in the background. The autonomous service works out where to deposit and moves accordingly. So that is that's the kind of vision of it. But in terms of practice, as I say, we really want to work with external teams on that. We have external teams working on it, and we have some internal code which we've already built as well, which we would be happy to have external teams extend. And so yeah, we're super excited about that opportunity.
Yeah, and I like that. I think that's pretty cool what you guys are building. So I mean, in terms of individual developers or even small teams, I mean, what's the next process for them? So how
Yeah.
are they going to implement Autonolas in their stack?
Yes, good question. So one thing we want to make quite clear is that this is a new thing. This is like it's a new type of software that you're building, and so it's important for developers to expect to like come in and they're learning a new framework. There are some new concepts, so we kind of want to set expectations a little bit about with that. I don't know if you're a developer at all, Arjun, but have you done?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, I have some experience with Solidity, and I've done Python quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so maybe you've come across things like Django.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So the way to think about it is really that you're learning something, like a new framework, like a Django or like a Ruby on Rails. Yeah. To an extent, Solidity, although it's not. I think it is more like the right way to think about it is more like a web framework. It's completely in Python, by the way. So yeah, so people who are kind of fluent in Python already have a big advantage in learning about it, and there are really no limitations to what languages we can support. So further down the line, we expect to support a lot of the kind of popular and common languages. And so yeah, basically for a developer, individual or a team, how it works is that they have to basically get up to speed a little bit with the framework, and we have lots of resources, and they're getting better all the time for actually doing that. We don't have our first iteration of the documentation out in public yet, but people want to. It won't be long before it is, for one thing, and if people want to directly work, they can reach out, and we can already share it with them. But the big thing that we have for helping people get up to speed is what we call the Academy, the Agent Developer Academy, which we've run. We've just finished our fourth cohort of. We've had lots of great code come out of it. Some of the one project we can't talk about publicly yet, but very exciting stuff which has come out there. And then El Collector, which we mentioned earlier, was a direct product of the Academy as well. And what it basically entails of is, well, it's in flux at the moment, but what it's moving towards is sort of a self-serve piece where you go in, you can consume lectures and written material, and then there are some workshops where you can kind of swing by and talk to one of our expert agent developers, and then after that we want to basically pull people in who are very committed and have them sort of work to become, like sort of fully qualified, if you will, and ideally help them find work within the ecosystem, because increasingly we have more and more people who are interested in building these services, but maybe they don't have the capacity in-house to learn a new framework yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea is that potentially as developers, as they come through, we could kind of provide a matching service. But ultimately that's what the protocol will do. The protocol will mean that Valerie or the Autonolas DAO even is secondary to the protocol, which actually puts people together and helps you go from an idea to a fully running service as quickly as possible.
So like I love the idea of having a developer academy, and I think it's free of cost, obviously, and it allows people to dive. It's free of cost, right?
Yes.
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I think it's the perfect stepping stone for people, and even those who might not be as familiar, it provides them an opportunity to learn something new, like you said. And I think it's vitally important in our ecosystem, where there's a need for these technical services. I mean, clearly, if you have coding skills, I mean, you're perfectly positioned in a space like crypto, which is evolving all the time. And then you guys come in with an academy like this that allows people take that extra step. And I think
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. So who is organizing? I mean, it's run by the team, I would imagine.
Yes. So in terms of who you actually interact with, the main person is called 8baller, who is, he's been in the space of kind of autonomous economic agency, sort of autonomous services for years now, and he leads the process. So you'd get FaceTime with him basically, and then other members of the team kind of dip in and out as well to help where necessary.
So how big is the Autonolas team?
The Autonolas team is in total 17. That's three co-founders and 14 employees. Technically, that's the Valerie team. Valerie is the company behind Autonolas.
Right. So I mean, like, I think for me, again, there's obviously, like, you've done such a good job explaining the whole space. So my natural question is, how do you see this evolve? Like right now, clearly there's a need for it, and now we're in the midst of a bear market. So I mean, how do you see the space evolve in the next 2-3 years?
Good question. So, okay, 2-3 years. Maybe we can extend it out further down the line as well. Sort of the sort of extreme long term as well, because I think people might find that quite interesting. But definitely next 2-3 years. So I think it basically looks like what we talked about before with at first probably sort of these semi-autonomous services, which DAOs adopt for things like treasury management, for managing their governance processes more and more. And frankly, I think there's a good chance that as the bear market hits fuller flow and people don't necessarily have the capital or the interest to sustain their contributions to DAOs, I think it becomes more and more critical to keep DAOs running, to actually run them with more autonomous machines. So that's basically where I see us kind of getting a wedge in the beginning. I think one thing we're also very interested in is how we distribute these autonomous services to DAOs. I think the opportunity there is to work with DAO frameworks or DAO aggregators, the likes of maybe the likes of Gnosis Safe, or who have an app store, likes of Aragon who have an app store. And it's quite a common model, and frankly, I think it makes a lot of sense that these kind of people who provide tools to DAOs, and they kind of aggregate the attention of DAOs and are seen as authorities, are the people who distribute these kind of things, which like can radically improve the operation of DAOs. And so yeah, we have some early conversations going on there. And so I think over the next 2 or 3 years, we see the first of those like really put a lot of weight behind it, and really start kind of pushing these autonomous services to like down to their DAOs as like kind of significant ways for them to improve their operations. So that's what I see in the next 2 or 3 years in terms of kind of getting a wedge and distributing that wedge. But then like much further down the line, what do I see? Like what's the sort of the long-term vision? Basically, I think DAOs as the internet, kind of like the internet native company, become increasingly autonomous. So it's not just about sort of more simple applications like treasury management or like payroll, governance, whatever. It becomes about like just the one of the main means by which you build and run and operate a DAO. And so internally, I think DAOs become more and more autonomous, and autonomous services begin to form a more and more extensive part of what constitutes a DAO and its operations. That's in terms of fully autonomous services, but also like protocols which coordinate things like code contribution or marketing. We didn't really get to talk about that kind of thing, but that's something that I definitely see emerging. And then I think the next stage from there is that as these kind of autonomous companies, or like actually autonomous DAOs, are increasingly able to deploy new services themselves and to interoperate. I think there's this very interesting idea that at the smart contract level, basically you have composability in the sense that one smart contract can talk to another, no problem. But then when you get to the actual DAO level, where a DAO might want to buy insurance from another DAO, or negotiate some deal for a DAO to do some marketing for it, there's no composability whatsoever. There's no way for a DAO to kind of programmatically kind of consume or like or purchase the services of another DAO. And I think as DAOs become increasingly autonomous, it's possible for an individual DAO to interact with other DAOs fully autonomously as well. And so at that point, I think you begin to see the emergence of actual kind of fully autonomous economies, where it's not just individual organizations which have this property, but it's an actual kind of a full ecosystem of sort of DAOs talking to one another, trading with one another, and operating at a level of kind of efficiency and efficacy that it gets increasingly progressive, increasingly impressive and more capable as time goes on.
Do you see DAOs replacing the traditional structures we see today, or do you think they're going to play a complementary role to each other?
So I think they disrupt. I think they disrupt the traditional organization, and disrupt in the sense of like the the original definition as it was defined by Clayton Christensen, in the sense that initially they serve a purpose that looks maybe niche or kind of like a toy at the moment. I think to the rest of the world, DAOs basically look like a toy, even with all the money that they're controlling. They look like a toy. But as they become increasingly sophisticated and are able to do things that like traditional companies can't, then I think they look really. Then I think they can begin to eat into a lot of the kind of the market for yeah, coordination, shall we say.
So I mean,
yeah.
Sorry, go on. You're saying?
Yeah, I was just gonna like take it to the furthest extreme. So we kind of talked about like actually autonomous DAOs, and then we talked about sort of as DAOs become actually autonomous, how you can get like fuller economies of DAOs sort of interoperating and kind of working together to create an economy. But then I think the really long term or the really unique thing, and I think this is the sort of the most unique thing which comes out of crypto and Web3 in general, is an idea of autonomous outcomes. So there's a whole set of kind of technological and sort of financial history here, which I probably don't have time to go into, but I think autonomous outcomes are what truly separates crypto from the internet. In that, so what do I mean by an autonomous outcome? Essentially, I think what we're going to be able to see as DAOs become more and more autonomous and able to interoperate is that from the perspective of a consumer, either a DAO itself or an end user, that rather than saying that I use a product or I use a service, what you actually end up doing is saying, this is the outcome that I want to see achieved. And then in the background, a set of autonomous services or organizations takes the action in order to make that a reality. So, like in a way you can there aren't many services which exist like this yet in the real world, but I suppose you could think of it a bit like a travel agent. Like you go to a travel agent and you're like, I want to have a holiday which is sort of chilled out, where I can go to a like a mount, like I can walk in the mountains during the day and then come back and like chill out on the beach. I don't want to travel for more than like 2 to 4 hours or something like that. And basically that travel agent goes out and just like books everything for you, and then magically you just kind of have to turn up and go through the motions in order to make all that happen. And I think that as more and more sort of data and functionality, but more and more these autonomous systems are kind of come into effect and are able to work together, that becomes possible for a much broader range of kind of industries than we've seen before. And it's difficult to talk about like very specifics there. It's still kind of a vision that we're formulating, but I think that's ultimately what I find the most exciting about, I think, crypto in general, but specifically sort of autonomous or these autonomous services.
Like I think the idea of autonomous outcome, I think that's interesting. I've never thought about something like that. And clearly, I mean, it's wonderful seeing an organization like yours thinking about it. I mean, clearly you guys are involved and you have this long-term vision of how this all plays out. So I mean, so anyone who's listening to this right now, what's the next logical step for them? How can they get involved with Autonolas?
Yeah. So it depends who they are. I would say if you're an individual developer and you're interested and you think you might want to build one of these autonomous services, and you see it as kind of like a maybe more interesting than pure smart contract development, then the thing to do is to sign up to the Agent Developer Academy, and I'll send through the link to that so that Arjun, you can put it in the show notes. So that's what I'd recommend there. If you're a team and you're looking to either you're a DAO yourself, and maybe your protocol you feel could be more robust in terms of how it works off the chain, or if you recognize these problems about treasury management issues or governance, then the right thing to do would be to reach out to me. I'm one of the co-founders. I never really mentioned this, but I'm one of the co-founders of Valerie, and my responsibility in Autonolas is sort of bringing new projects to develop on the stack. So reach out to me. I'm just at Tanned Oak Sprout on Twitter. Tanned like having a tan, and Oak Sprout.
I mean, I'll attach all the links. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. And then if you're just curious, I would also encourage you just to reach out to me. I'm happy to chat with everybody who's coming into the community personally, but also I would suggest looking at the L collector when it comes out soon, because that's something you can kind of interact with directly and get a sense of like what makes an autonomous service different. I think you can also check out the website, check out the blog, which we'll post links to, and yeah, that's probably it.
Perfect. On that note, thank you so much all for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Cheers.
Cheers.